Eastern with the final name or two. It was a crazy day, and it's time to react. And so there was so much to peel back. There was so much to discuss. I want to do winners and losers. I think Zach Edey is probably the most notable name from the day, but I want to get to the biggest story. I'm a story guy. I'm a narrative guy. I'm a topic guy. And I want to start with the biggest loser. And the biggest loser is a program that we've talked about a lot. If you're not a fan of Kentucky basketball, forgive me, but this is the biggest story in college sports right now as Kentucky. It has been just a disastrous offseason. For those of you who have not paid attention, I've kind of talked about it a few times, but here is what has happened at Kentucky over the last couple months, okay? Lose to Kansas State in the second round of the NCAA tournament. From there, you have the normal, mechanisms, what they call machinations, whatever you want to call it, of the offseason. Couple guys declare for the draft. Couple guys enter the portal. Couple guys test the NBA draft waters. And so what you were left with coming into the draft deadline was a very thin roster, as Kentucky has essentially, I don't want to say they've sat out of the transfer market because they went after Hunter Dickinson. They went after Keyshawn Johnson, but I didn't think they were aggressive enough. We're going to get to that in a minute. And what Kentucky was left with coming into the deadline day was this: a 5-man high school recruiting class that admittedly is very good, number 1 class in the country, 4 top 10 players, probably 3 lottery picks in DJ Wagner, Aaron Bradshaw, and Justin Edwards. So it's not a complete disaster. But outside of those 5 freshmen, you have 1 redshirt freshman, Agana Onyenso, who played in 1 SEC game this year, and you have a true sophomore, Adu Thiero, who, as I've said a few times, plays hard, like the kid, respect him, but he's probably a year away from being a real contributor. That is what Kentucky had coming into NBA draft deadline day, and that is why draft deadline day was so big for them. 3 players were on the fence about coming back. The former National Player of the Year, Oscar Tshiebwe, Antonio Reeves, a sharpshooter, big game, 37 points in the regular season finale at Arkansas, Chris Livingston, a former 5-star who had his moments but didn't really click. I'll be blunt, didn't really feel like Chris Livingston was ever planning on coming back. But going into the day, there was hopes that the other 2 would come back because none of the 3 are projected in most any major NBA mock draft. Well, here's the good news. Kentucky technically didn't go 0 for 3, but as my buddy Nick Roush, who covers football for Kentucky Sports Radio, joked, he said, Kentucky went 1/2 of 3. Oscar Tshiebwe is staying in the NBA draft. Chris Livingston is staying in the NBA draft. Antonio Reeves announced he was going to come back, but did not commit to coming back to Kentucky. Now, reports, multiple people, Jack Pilgrim was the one I saw put it out there, is that he's maybe going to consider testing the waters, but it's really about NIL. It's about role. It's about making sure that Kentucky is right for him going forward. And by the way, he should look at all his options. That's perfectly okay. But with it, Kentucky was undoubtedly the biggest loser on the NBA draft deadline day. And more importantly, Kentucky has a very contentious situation with its roster going into next season. Now, we'll get to, I think there are 1 or 2 positives in a second. But what this comes down to, and it's something I've been talking about since early April. Remember, players can start entering the portal in mid-March now. And in early April, I noticed, I sent out a tweet April 5th. It was the day after I got home from the Final Four. I said, Kentucky is moving awfully slow in the transfer portal. And I had a ton of people, oh, Torres, you don't know what you're talking about. You have no sources. You're an idiot. You're this, you're that. And what I said was, listen, I'm not saying you have to have 7 commitments lined up, but you cannot wait in the portal. You can't take a week, 10 days to evaluate a kid before, oh, I'm going to grace them with a Kentucky offer. That's not how the portal works. Kids move fast, schools move fast, commitments move fast, and you have to move fast with Kentucky. And so I said it on draft deadline day Wednesday, and I'm going to stand by it. The Arkansas approach to the portal is the way that you need to operate in 2023. Now, Eric Musselman, love the guy, takes it to an extreme, but Eric Musselman, when you see a list of every marquee portal player and Arkansas is on the list, understand it's not a game, it's not a gimmick, it's not cute, it's not funny. What Eric Musselman is essentially doing is he is reaching out to everybody to get a feel for who's good, who's not, who might be interested, who isn't, who's about NIL, who wants to actually play, what's my good role going to be, all that good stuff. So that if anything happens, you have a backup plan. And if the backup plan falls through, you have a backup plan to a backup plan. And that's why they reach out to 75, 80, 90 kids. And it's also why their roster's largely set going into draft deadline day. If you play at Arkansas, you know, if I'm going to test the NBA draft waters, Coach Muss is going to recruit over me. And so I said 8 weeks ago, if you're Kentucky, you can't wait until the NBA draft deadline and hope good stuff happens. You have to move quicker. You have to get yourself settled. And I just believe this has been a train wreck of a situation at Kentucky. Now, what I would say about that is this, is that, listen, a couple things. One, it falls on Cal. There's no other way to it. There's nothing else to put it, but it has been a train wreck. You cannot wait. You cannot wait until the end of May to try and figure out what works, what doesn't, what's good, what's not, what's this, what's that. You have to have answers. You have to have backup plans to backup plans, and you cannot wait. And so I bring it up because, listen, I don't know how much longer the Calipari era is going to go on. I have a saying on this show. I don't call for Cal's job because ultimately at the end of the day, most years he's going to have you in contention and in position. I know the last couple of years have been disappointing, but it doesn't change the fact that most seasons things are actually not in terrible shape. And so I bring it up because, listen, this is kind of a come to you-know-what moment for Kentucky basketball. If Calipari continues after next season, and right now there's no indication that he's going to step away, you have to have a different approach in the portal. You have to move quicker. You have to think quicker. You have to evaluate quicker. I'll be blunt. Not only do you have to evaluate quicker, let's take it a step further. You have to, in some cases, know about guys that are going to enter the portal before they enter the portal. I've said it many times. If you are waiting until the draft deadline to evaluate a player, to reach out to a player, to even know, or excuse me, if you're waiting for a player to enter the portal before you evaluate him or are even aware of who he is, you're too far behind. There are guys that are entering the portal that already know where they want to go, that know where they want to visit, that have it down to one or two schools. You cannot wait. And so I'm not going to go on. And what I will say is, from Kentucky's perspective, I do think there are a few positives. One, I think ultimately you're going to get Antonio Reeves back. That is a positive, end of story, no doubt about it. Beyond that, I would also say, listen, criticize a lot, but a couple things. The freshmen, Calipari's best teams have always been a ton of freshmen and NBA talent at the freshman spot, specifically at the point guard spot. DJ Wagner is that, and I believe that DJ Wagner can put Kentucky in a position to have success next year alongside Justin Edwards, who I think will be really good. And last thing on Kentucky, there is one positive, and that is that Arthur Kaluma, who I believe is the best player in the portal still, announced that he is withdrawing from the NBA draft and has decided that he will come back to college but enter the transfer portal. 13.5 points per game, didn't hit enough three-pointers, but this is an NBA-type talent. And Jeff Borzello put out a list of schools that he's considering, and Kentucky is very high up on that list. For Kentucky, this, listen, no more excuses. You got to go get this guy. And don't tell me about your NIL, because here's the thing, right? I hear Kentucky fans say, oh, our NIL, we're behind in our AD this and Calipari that. NIL isn't affecting the football program. It's not. So don't tell me it's about NIL. If it's about playing with freshmen, you got to figure out a way. And Kaluma is the one guy. He wants to be a one and done. He doesn't want to be in college. He wants to go to a place where he can ball out, have success, go pro, get drafted. If you're Kentucky, you got to get him. And then you got to find some other guys in the portal as well. Because what I will say is, yes, it's late, but you can still find role players in the portal. And don't tell me nobody wants to be a role player. Don't tell me that nobody wants to be a role player. At the end of the day, I still believe that for Kentucky, there are players you can get. I'm a UConn alum. Joey Calcaterra, if you remember, key part of the national championship team. He didn't commit until last year in late June, early July. So there are still guys. He played a role. He was important. Kentucky, you've got to move. You've just got to move. You cannot wait. Let's get to some of the other. All right, let's get to some other NBA draft deadline news and notes. And listen, little glass is half empty to start the show. So let's get to some positives. And I don't think there was a single program anywhere in college basketball that had a better day than, of all teams, might be a little bit surprising, the Creighton Blue Jays. So we talked about Creighton on Monday's show, but this is a program that made the Elite Eight. They did have some offseason stuff happen. I just referenced Arthur Kaluma is in the transfer portal, as was their starting point guard, Ryan Nembhard. But it was a team that kind of was up and down all year, but had two really, really good, really, really important players that were testing the NBA draft waters up until the end of Memorial Day weekend. Now, the first big piece of news they got was on Monday, and it was a great piece of news on Memorial Day. Ryan Kalkbrenner, a 7'1" center, 16 points per game, 6 rebounds, 2.5 blocks per game, all Big East first team. I think you can legitimately argue that he might be the best two-way center in college basketball in terms of offensive prowess, but also defensive as well. He ends up announcing that he's coming back on Monday, which set up big things on Wednesday when Trey Alexander, a guard who averaged 13 points per game on 43% three-point shooting, his draft decision came down to the wire. And I'll be blunt, I spoke with somebody kind of close and kind of knows some things in that Creighton community. And they said, we're not really expecting him back. If we do, it'd be incredible, but we don't think we're going to get him back. Well, about 9 p.m. Eastern time, the Creighton Blue Jays got the best news possible as Trey Alexander became the second of 2 key players to announce his return to Creighton. And let me just tell you this. The Blue Jays, as crazy as it sounds, I believe this is a team that is good enough to get to Phoenix for the 2024 Final Four. Would be the first Final Four in school history. I believe they're a team that's good enough to cut down the nets in Phoenix as well. So what you need to know about Creighton, what I just said. First off, I think they got 2 all Big East caliber type guys back over the last couple of days. Kalkbrenner, 7-footer, offense, defense. He changes the game on both ends. And Trey Alexander, the thing that I like about him, he is a guy that can play on the ball. He can play off the ball. He was actually forced into kind of a point guard-ish role 2 seasons ago because of injuries. But when he plays off the ball, 14 points per game, 40% three-point shooting. And again, this was a guy that I think could have been drafted had he stayed in the NBA draft. Instead, he'll come back. Creighton is already getting back Baylor Shireman, 5th-year guy, played last year at Creighton, had a really good year after transferring from South Dakota State. And they've added a couple players from the portal, most notably a kid named Steve Ashworth, who was the best player on Utah State, which made the NCAA tournament as well. So when it comes to Creighton, listen, they don't have a ton of depth. They're not a team that's going to go 8, 9, 10 deep. But they do have a starting 5 as good as anybody in college basketball. And again, this is a team that I believe will be good enough to compete at the highest level. I'd also add, no disrespect to Kaluma, no disrespect to Ryan Nembhard, but I do wonder if there were some chemistry issues in that locker room, chemistry issues which I think will be better next year. Let's stick with a big winner of Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon. And how about the Purdue Boilermakers? And Purdue, we've talked about it again and again and again. It was really only one player testing. That player, though, was a big one. Literally, figuratively, metaphorically, Zach Edey, your national player of the year. It came down to the wire. And as I said a couple days ago, I was surprised how seriously Zach Edey took this NBA draft process. I thought he was going to test. I thought he was going to just kind of feel it out, talk to some NBA teams. He took it right down to the wire. But again, about 9 p.m. Eastern time, announces that he is going to return to Purdue. And so I can't even explain in the college basketball hierarchy how important this is for a few reasons. One, listen, you guys and girls know I'm not Mr. Purdue. I've been more critical of Matt Painter, I think, than anybody in the college basketball media. But at the same time, we can pretend that this program is a total, like they were still the Big Ten regular season champs. They were still the Big Ten tournament champs. And now they return all 5 starters off that team that was basically in the top 5 from about late November on. And so I'm not here to tell you that this is going to be the first year. They're going to win a national championship. They're going to do everything that every Purdue team has failed to do. They are coming off a couple of disappointing seasons, but it doesn't change the fact that, in my opinion, they are good enough to win it all. And what I would also say, and by the way, I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying they're good enough. What I would also say, I think this is a big win for college basketball. We're going to, later on in the show, talk about some comments that Nick Saban had on NIL and the state of college football. But at the same time, while NIL is wreaking chaos and everyone's trying to figure things out, What you also can't deny, it's keeping great college athletes in college sports for longer than ever before. I know I just talked about Oscar Tshiebwe leaving, but at the same time, keep in mind, he was a National Player of the Year that at this time last year decided to come back and play a second year at Kentucky, a fourth year of college basketball overall. I can't tell you how big that is for the sport of college basketball. I can't tell you how big it is for the sport of college basketball to have Zach Edey returning this year as well. And so I could go on, but this is great for the sport. This is great for Purdue. And again, not saying they're going to win the national title, but I think they certainly can. One team, I don't know what to say other than, it was a little bit of a toss-up for the Arkansas Razorbacks. Listen, Eric Musselman, we just talked about it a minute ago. There are always a lot of moving parts in his program. It was a very interesting day, to say the least. Let's get to the good and the bad for Arkansas. First of all, the good. By the way, good, bad, and unexpected, I think, is the right way to put it for Arkansas. The good, you got back Devo Davis. This is a veteran guy. How about this? This is a guy that has been there for 4 years. So everybody says, oh, Eric Musselman, guy's coming in and out. He will be in his fourth year next year. He will be trying to make the NCAA tournament's second weekend for the fourth time in 4 years. He was a big part of their Elite Eight team in 2021, hit the game-winning shot against Oral Roberts to send Arkansas to the Elite Eight that year, was part of the team that made the Elite Eight in 2022, and then, of course, this year's Sweet 16 team as well. And so for Arkansas, I know it's all about the new guys. It's always going to be that way in college basketball. We get excited about the portal guys, the freshmen, the whatever. But bringing back a veteran who has been in this program, you cannot put a price on it. And I already liked Arkansas. Adding him back, I just think further solidifies them in my mind as a top 10 team. Not going to go through their whole roster because we've done it a million times this offseason. But Trevin Brazile, I believe, is an all-SEC type guy. And then just a ton of talent out of the portal. 5 different players, 5 guards, a bunch of guys who can put the ball in the basket. L. Ellis from Louisville, Khalif Battle from Temple, Keon Menafield from Washington, and of course, Tremont Mark from Houston. I would also add, talk about an elite defensive backcourt. Devo Davis, Tremont Mark are both individually as good as anybody. So that was a big win for Arkansas. A big loss was that Jordan Walsh, former 5-star McDonald's All-American, decided to leave. That really isn't surprising, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. What I do want to spend a little bit of time on, Ron Holland. So we've talked so much about Ron Holland on this show over the last month, and with good reason. #1 high school player in America, was committed to Texas, decommits from Texas in late April. And I said that day, I said, it's either going to be Arkansas or G League Ignite, the professional route. Well, what I can tell you is that the Arkansas staff felt very confident. It's not from them, but you hear things through the grapevine. I can tell you they felt great about their position with Ron Holland right up until Wednesday morning, the day of the NBA draft deadline. My understanding was, yes, they were going to lose some guys, but they were going to announce Ron Holland on Wednesday or Thursday, and they were going to be good to go and roll into the season. And so I bring it up because Wednesday morning, you just start to hear these rumblings really quick that G League Ignite has upped its offer, that G League Ignite is going to pay Ron Holland more money than people ever expected, and Ron Holland ultimately committed to G League Ignite. Now, from the player perspective, I'll just say this. I wish him the best. I'm never going to begrudge any kid for taking an alternate route to college basketball. College isn't for everybody. College isn't, some guys want to be a professional and want to be developed in that manner. Totally get it. No disrespect to Ron Holland. And if the numbers that I was told are accurate, almost couldn't turn it down based on some of the numbers that I heard about the money that may have been offered. Also, not really worried about it from Arkansas perspective. He would have been a cherry on top of the sundae, but you also can't really sit here and say that Arkansas is in trouble. I think they're a top 5 team going into next year. I do want to say, though, and I've said this a few times, really quickly, give me 30 seconds for a tangent. I don't really get what G League Ignite's endgame is, okay? So if you remember, by the way, this isn't a criticism of the program. I've said it many times. Jason Hart runs the program. Great coach. Know him, West Coast, whatever. I bring it up because G League Ignite was initially a program that was installed as an alternate route to the NBA for college basketball. It was for players explicitly, they stated in their mission statement for players who did not want to play college basketball. And so it was never intended as a program that was going to get into bidding wars for players and we're going to offer you this much more than that. Like, it was never intended to be that. And so I'm just a little confused as to what its function is. Now, if it's a developmental program for kids who don't want to play college basketball or international players who want a year before entering the NBA draft, I totally get it. But for the NBA to spend millions of dollars to recruit players who were going to go to college otherwise, I don't really get what the end game is. The NBA has a great feeder system in college basketball, and you have enough things to spend money on without spending tens of millions of dollars to run a developmental program for guys who ultimately want to go to college. So I wish Ron Holland nothing but the best. It's not a disrespect to him. Take your money, get the money that you can, but I just find it weird. It's one thing if a kid just says, I don't want to be a college basketball player, I need another route. But this kid wanted to go to college. This kid intended to go to college, and G League Ignite beat them to the punch. Let's get to a couple other winners and losers from the NBA draft deadline. One, let's go back to the Big East. Big winner, Tyler Burton. Richmond transfer, was in the NBA draft, ends up leaving the draft and committing to Villanova. And I'll just say this. I don't know how good Kyle Neptune is as a head coach, the head coach at Villanova. He took over for Jay Wright. They struggled last year. But this dude has cleaned up in the portal to the point that I just dropped my new way too early top 25. And for the first time, Villanova is in it. They have crushed the portal. TJ Bamba, Washington State's leading scorer, he is going to Villanova. This kid, Tyler Burton, 19 points per game at Richmond, all A10 performer. He's going to Villanova. Beyond that, Hakeem Hart, really good player out of Maryland. He's going to Villanova. And then Lance Ware, remember that name from Kentucky, is going to Villanova as well. So you add them in with the returnees at Villanova. That is a loaded squad. That is a good squad. That is a top 20 squad in my mind. And I'll tell you, we're going to learn next year if Kyle Neptune can coach or not, because he has a squad that is good enough to win a lot of games. Really quickly, up and down day, I think, for my alma mater, UConn, but nothing really surprising. So Tristan Newton, who came on really strong, really late in the year, he averaged 19 points, or he scored 19 points in the championship game, national championship game against San Diego State. He ended up announcing early in the day that he was coming back. He is a really important piece for UConn. 10 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists per game. I think he's going to bring a veteran presence back to UConn. UConn now will return 3 really key players off last year's national championship team, him, Alex Caravan, Donovan Clingan. But UConn did lose. By the way, UConn also has a top 3 recruiting class in college basketball. UConn, however, did lose Andre Jackson, kind of the stalwart, do-it-all guy from that national championship team. Now, I'll be blunt. This had been expected for a while. Talked to somebody kind of close to the situation on Monday, Tuesday, something like that. They said, yeah, we don't expect him back. And all I could say is UConn's not surprised. To me, it doesn't affect UConn. I still think they're somewhere between the 4th or 5th best. They're a top 10 team, in my opinion, going into next year. But you look at Andre Jackson, the impact that he had on the program. This was a kid that committed to UConn after Dan Hurley's first year when UConn had lost a ton of games. All right, I take that back. After his second year before they had entered the Big East. So first year they had a losing record. Second year they struggled, but he came to UConn, committed after a losing season, and then came after a second season in which they would not have made the tournament in 2020. Leaves UConn 3 NCAA tournaments and a national champion. And I think I speak for a lot of UConn fans and alums when I say I wish him nothing but the best. By all accounts, a great kid, a great leader. I think he struggled with this decision. I think in his heart of hearts, he actually probably wanted to come back, but I think he also probably understood you're coming off a national championship. You are one of the best players in the tournament. Your stock is never going to be higher. Wish Andre Jackson nothing but the best. Finally, Illinois. And we talked a lot about Illinois over the last couple days, but Illinois had a heck of an NBA draft deadline, and here is why. They had 2 really good players that were testing as of Wednesday afternoon, and they got both of them back. Their leading scorer, Terrence Shannon Jr., TJ Shannon, 17 points per game. He announced that he would be coming back. Coleman Hawkins, a do-it-all forward, announced he was going to be coming back as well. And with it, I think Illinois is probably right around a top 25 team. I had him at 26 in my poll that just dropped at Aaron Torres online. I think probably if I had to do it over again, I may move them up a little bit, maybe somewhere into that 20 spot. Two veteran guys, a proven scorer. I think Illinois has a chance to be very, very, very good next season. So big day for them. Solid day, by the way, for UCLA. They got a Dembona back. Thought that was an important piece for them. And I think that's it. I might have missed a guy or two. Reese Beekman going back to Virginia. I think that is a major, major, major piece for them. So credit to Virginia for landing him. But overall, I would say the biggest loser of the day undoubtedly was Kentucky. Probably the biggest winners, Creighton, Purdue, and I also think Illinois was a big winner. Shout out to Villanova.